युद्ध में कोई विजयी पार्टी नहीं होगी, सभी को नुकसान होगा।
It's 9 p.m. in India, 5:30 p.m. in Germany. We're tracking a very important visit. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on his first visit to Europe since the war in Ukraine began. It is being billed as the beginning of a new chapter in India's engagements with Europe. This will be the Indian leader's first meeting with the new German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Later, he's meeting Nordic leaders in Denmark, and then he heads to Paris to meet Emmanuel Macron barely 10 days after the French president was re-elected. The agenda is clear: turning the crisis of war into an opportunity for alliance. India has emerged as part of the solution, not just to mitigate the impact of war, but also plug supply chain gaps. This visit is important because India's potential with Europe is immense and unrealized. The meetings today and over the next few days should change that, accelerate progress, and take this partnership out of the shadow of the India-US ties. On Gravitas tonight, we'll bring you the highlights and the analysis. A war has upended 7 decades of global order. The rules of engagement are being rewritten, and it's against this backdrop that the Indian Prime Minister is visiting Europe. There are 3 stops on his tour. It starts with Germany. Prime Minister Modi began his engagements in Germany today. The next stops are Denmark and France. What's on the agenda? And what is India hoping to get from this outreach? In the next few minutes, that's what we'll discuss, starting with the question, why now? Why is Prime Minister Modi engaging with Europe now? Europe is at war. Russia has invaded Ukraine. India has been doing a tough balancing act. It was supposed to have been pushed in the corner. It has, in fact, taken center stage. The war has created opportunities for engagement, and that's why the Indian Prime Minister is in Europe. He landed in Berlin yesterday. He was greeted by members of the Indian diaspora. Today, Prime Minister Modi of India held talks with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. This is their first meeting since Scholz took office in December. The Prime Minister went into the meeting with a power-packed delegation: External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. They were all part of today's meeting. The leaders discussed a range of topics. They signed 9 agreements too. One of them is the Green Sustainable Energy Partnership. But from their press statements, it became clear that it was Russia's war in Ukraine that dominated the discussions. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi reiterated New Delhi's position. He highlighted how India was working to mitigate the impact of war.
हमारा मानना है कि इस युद्ध में कोई विजयी पार्टी नहीं होगी, सभी को नुकसान होगा। इसलिए हम शांति के पक्ष में है। ह्यूमैनिटेरियन इंपैक्ट से भारत बहुत ही चिंतित है। इससे विश्व के हर परिवार पर बोझ पड़ा है, किंतु विकासशील और गरीब देशों पर इसका असर और गंभीर होगा।
What about Germany? How does Olaf Scholz see India's position? The German Chancellor did not criticize India, but he says he wants India to do more.
Through its attack on Ukraine, Russia has violated fundamental principles of international law. The war and the brutal attacks against and on the civilian population of Ukraine show how unrestrained Russia has been in violating the fundamental principles of the UN Charter. Thus, I repeat my appeal to Vladimir Putin: end this war, end this senseless killing, withdraw your troops from Ukraine.
No lectures from Europe for a change. Later today, Scholz will have dinner with the Indian Prime Minister. What else did the leaders discuss today? A possible trade agreement between India and the European Union. Prime Minister Modi said that some progress has been made. The German leader acknowledged India's progress in tackling climate change. He also brought up the extreme heat wave in India. The two sides agreed to work together towards tackling the climate crisis. Now, these may all sound like routine statements, but this engagement with Germany is significant. This country is a key European power. It is also a traditional conservative player. Germany is hosting the G7 meeting next month. It wants to use the event to build an alliance of sorts, an alliance to isolate Russia. And Germany is inviting India as a special guest to the G7. Others on the list are South Africa, Senegal and Indonesia. The pitch is quite simple. Let's join hands and isolate Russia, which is fine, but it's pointless till Germany and its European allies keep bankrolling the Russian war. What's the point of statements and sanctions and criticism when you're paying Russia millions of dollars every day? Well, that's Europe for you. The Indian Prime Minister's next stop is Denmark. There he will hold talks with Prime Minister Frederiksen, and he will attend the second IndiaNordic Summit. Leaders from Iceland, Finland, Sweden and Norway will also be there. A range of issues are up for discussion. The list includes the Ukraine-Russia war, post-pandemic economic recovery, climate change, technology and renewable energy, a whole host of things. The Prime Minister's final stop will be France. And this, again, is extremely important. Modi will be the first international leader to visit Paris since Macron's re-election as president. Their partnership has been strong and solid. India and France could influence the outcome of the war in Ukraine. They have lines of communication with both Moscow and Kiev. And apart from Ukraine, they're expected to discuss China's aggression in the Indo-Pacific and key defense and security matters. And this includes the delivery of the Rafale aircraft. The trade deal could also be taken up for discussion. France will have the presidency of the European Union this year, so this makes it even more important. And it could determine the outcome of the negotiations. Like I said in the beginning, this is the start of a new chapter. And there's a reason why this visit is getting so much press, why the expectations are so high. Because this could be the start, like I said, of a new paradigm. I'll tell you why I say this. India-Europe relations have been caught in some sort of a jinx. There's a lot of potential, but very little results. For instance, bilateral trade. It's worth almost $110 billion. That's the trade between India and Europe, $110 billion. And yet, there is no free trade agreement. India and Europe announced a strategic partnership way back in 2004. That was almost 18 years back. There are student exchanges, cultural exchanges, but something's always been missing, sort of like an X factor. Compare that to India-US ties or India-UK ties, if you like. They have taken off in the last decade. So why not the European Union? A couple of reasons. Number one, Europe as a united bloc is a recent phenomenon. In the first 40 years of India's independence, Europe was a continent divided. Western Europe backed America. Eastern Europe backed the Soviet Union. There was no single entity to deal with. When the Cold War ended, two things happened. And this is very interesting. One, Europe organized itself into a bloc. And two, India liberalized its economy. It was a perfect chance to build something big. Instead, it became a lost opportunity. Reason number two, Europe was slow to recognize India's importance. I'm talking about the European Union as a whole, not individual member states, and that equation was always strong. India buys weapons from France. India trades extensively with Germany. So with individual countries, the relationship is solid. But as a whole, the EU was short-sighted on India. Compare that to Russia or China. The European Union has signed joint trade agreements with both. Energy deals. That level of cooperation never happened with India. And this visit could change that. But what has triggered this change? In simple words, reality has hit home on both sides. Until now, Europe enjoyed the unipolar world. American money, American weapons, American protection. Washington was like their godfather. But even godfathers can be vulnerable. You have China challenging the US in the Indo-Pacific. You have Russia in Ukraine. So Europe has been forced to look out for itself, to chart its own course. Just look at their recent policies. More involvement in the Indo-Pacific, more defense spending, murmurs of a European army. What does all of this mean? It means that Europe is stepping out of America's shadows. And now is the right time for India to engage, to create an independent India-Europe partnership, not just an offshoot of India-US ties. In Brussels, there's a similar realization about India, the world's largest democracy, a counterweight to China, plus an economic powerhouse. Simply put, Europe cannot ignore India's rise anymore, and that explains the reset. But will this reset lead to tangible results? That's another question. Most experts are focused on two things, trade and security. Those are going to be key. The India-EU free trade deal could be a game changer. Both sides have set a new deadline to conclude the talks. That's 2024. That's the deadline. The second priority is security. Europe is hoping for more cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, more interoperability between armies, more weapons purchases. I know it sounds pretty good, but one thing can derail all these prospects, and that is Russia's war in Ukraine. So Europe has two options here. Option number one, respect India's position on the war, basically dehyphenate Russia and the rest of it. The second option is to pressurize India, to try and force India to criticize Putin's war. If Europe chooses option number two, that is criticizing India, it will be counterproductive, especially looking at their own record. Europe continues to buy Russian gas worth billions. Every day they pay up to 800 million euros to Russia, every day. Germany is leading the way. 40% of their natural gas comes from Russia. Their companies are open to paying Putin in rubles. What's more, Chancellor Olaf Scholz is unsure about sending weapons to Ukraine. Last week, he agreed to send tanks and rockets, but Ukraine wants more. More weapons, more sanctions, and more leadership. But Chancellor Schultz is not willing to step up. Well, here's what he says. I take my decisions fast and in concert with our partners, is the German leader saying. I find hasty actions and maverick German efforts questionable. You know what's maverick? Single-handedly funding Putin's war, because that's what Germany is doing. Some countries in Eastern Europe are not happy about this, like Poland or the Baltic states. They want Germany to get tough. And this will be another challenge to India-Europe relations, the divisions within. Because the European experiment depends on unity, more integration, more political coordination. But right now, Europe is divided. They can't even decide on how to deal with Vladimir Putin, and that could derail Europe's ambitions, unlike India or America or China. Europe does not have a single power center. Power flows from all 27 member states. Imagine getting 27 states to agree on hundreds of policy matters. It's a nightmare. If Europe can navigate those pitfalls, it can emerge as an independent powerhouse. We'll be tracking this visit. But speaking of nightmares, passengers on board a flight in India lived their worst nightmare this weekend. A flight from Mumbai to Durgapur experienced severe turbulence. At one point, cabin luggage began raining on passengers. Oxygen masks dropped from the panels. At least 15 people were injured. 2 of them are in ICU, intensive care unit. The crew has been taken off roster along with the flight engineer. Our next report tells you what happened on board this flight.
It was a Sunday evening. A flight from Mumbai took off for Durgapur, an industrial city in the Indian state of West Bengal. There was nothing unusual about the weather at the destination. The cockpit crew had done their due diligence. And the flight was in the air. It was to cover a distance of nearly 2,000 kilometers. The travel time was a little over 2.5 hours. Everything was normal, till the flight began descending. The aircraft hit a patch of rough weather. Severe turbulence followed, and before passengers realized, the cabin baggage was dropping from above. The aircraft's ceiling appeared to give way. oxygen masks were dropping from panels above. Goes without saying, there was panic. Severe panic. The flight managed to land safely, but with at least 15 cases of injury. 12 of them were passengers, the remaining 3 cabin crew. Some had injured their head, some had to get stitches. So, what exactly happened? While turbulence is normal, severe turbulence like this is not. Why did this flight turn into a nightmare? With all the technology and weather forecast, did the airline or the air traffic control not see the patch of rough weather? Actually, they did. Experts tell us that pre-monsoon is the worst time for air travel within the Calcutta and Dhaka FIR. FIR stands for Flight Information Region. The Calcutta and Dhaka FIR includes airports like Bhubaneswar, Guwahati, Agartala and Shillong. This belt experiences nor'westers during the pre-monsoon months. In other words, there are strong winds, torrential rain, often hail. This happens every year, and so does air travel to this region. Now, there are 2 things that determine whether or not a flight can safely fly and land at its destination. 1. Visibility, and 2. Winds. The turbulence-struck flight was cleared for both. It's likely that the plane hit a rain-bearing cloud, or what's called cumulonimbus cloud. While the pilots may have predicted turbulence, they may not have foreseen something so extreme. Could they have taken an alternative route, or do something differently to avoid the havoc? These are questions that India's Civil Aviation Authority will answer through its investigation. For now, the airline has expressed regret.
Now here's an interesting statistic for you. 1 out of 4 smartphones sold in India is a Xiaomi. In other words, if you sell 4 smartphones in India, chances are at least one of them is a Xiaomi. This year, they have sold 8 million units so far. In the first few months of this year, 8 million. Samsung is second with 6.9 million. Now that's a lot of market power, especially for a Chinese company in India. And with that kind of power comes a lot of scrutiny. That's where Xiaomi has failed, in the scrutiny. India's enforcement directorate has pulled up the phone maker. They have seized assets worth 5,550 crore rupees. That's about $725 million. What are the charges? The government says Xiaomi is violating forex laws. Here's a full statement from the Enforcement Directorate, and I'm quoting, "The company started its operations in India in 2014 and started remitting the money from 2015. The company has remitted foreign currency to 3 foreign-based entities, which include 1 Xiaomi Group entity in the guise of royalty." I'll tell you what this means. Xiaomi faked royalty payments. They paid $725 million to 3 foreign entities, and one of them belonged to the Xiaomi stable. Why were these payments illegal? Because nothing was given in return. No parts, no technology. These payments were simply a cover. Again, let me go back to the ED statement. This is what it says. Xiaomi India procures completely manufactured mobile sets and other products from manufacturers in India. Xiaomi India has not availed any service from the 3 foreign-based entities to whom such amounts have been transferred. Why did Xiaomi India do this? The ED, that's the Enforcement Directorate, says, because the parent company ordered them to do so. The parent company in China. Now, this raises questions about their credibility. Whose interests is Xiaomi serving? Should we keep buying their phones? The company says there's nothing to worry about, that all of this is a big misunderstanding. Maybe it is. But when it comes to such powerful companies, one has to be careful. These numbers should tell you why. Xiaomi controls 27% of India's smartphone market. They sell 8 million phones in a quarter. That's 32 million phones in 1 year, possibly more. The Indian consumer seems to like Xiaomi. It's affordable. It's got all the features. and you can buy them off any e-retailer. And this popularity has worked well for them. Xiaomi India's annual revenue is nearly $1 billion. They're now selling televisions, streaming devices, even air purifiers. So we decided to take a closer look at them. How independent is Xiaomi? Do they take orders from Beijing? Well, here's what we found about Xiaomi. Xiaomi was founded by this man, Lei Jun, the man on your screen. He created the company in 2010. Guess what happened 3 years later? Lei Jun was appointed to the National People's Congress, aka China's rubber stamp parliament. And the links do not end there. In 2015, Xiaomi set up a Communist Party committee within the company. Maybe the indirect control was not enough, so Xiaomi invited communists into their offices. The Trump administration flagged some of these issues. They branded Xiaomi as a Chinese military company. Later on, Joe Biden removed that tag. The fact is, there are links. The question is, how deep are those links? Xiaomi has been on India's radar for some time now. In January, their offices were raided by the Income Tax Department. They were fined for tax evasion. 1 month later, the Forex probe began. Turns out, $725 million were paid as fake royalty. And that's a lot of money. In response, Xiaomi is playing the victim card. They know about the tensions in Ladakh. They know about India's crackdown on Chinese tech giants. So Xiaomi feels that they're caught in the crossfire unfairly. And if they are, they will have every chance to prove that. You see, one of the benefits of living in a democracy is this. Xiaomi can appeal against the move. They can even approach the courts, real courts, not the rubber stamp ones in China. Now let's shift our attention to America's biggest headache at the moment, Russia. The war in Ukraine has snapped diplomatic ties. Now Moscow has in fact driven the final nail in this coffin. Russia has decided to withdraw from the International Space Station. What does this decision mean for our future in space? Will the sanctions against Russia on Earth divide space too? Our next report tells you more.
This is the International Space Station, a symbol of global cooperation. But it has now fallen victim to the rivalries on planet Earth. Russia is pulling out of the International Space Station. In the next 12 months, Russian astronauts will leave the facility. At the moment, 3 of them are working at the ISS. A few weeks back, they undertook this spacewalk. Russian astronauts installed a robotic arm that was made in Europe. Moscow has blamed Western sanctions for its decision. It is the end of an era. Despite tensions, America and Russia have kept up their cooperation in space. American astronauts continue to travel on Russian shuttles to space. NASA retired its space vehicles in 2011. Since then, they have been using the Soyuz spacecraft to transport astronauts. Before Russia withdrew, America began using private players like SpaceX to ferry its astronauts. That shift would accelerate now. Many saw this coming. Russia too has been quietly moving away from the West. The Russian space program is getting closer to China. In 2019, an agreement was signed. Russia and China are planning a mission to the South Pole of the Moon. The two countries plan to set up a base there. Eventually, they want to build their own space station. The war in Ukraine has divided the world. Western sanctions have isolated Moscow, and now the battle has spilled into space. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
And now for another threat that India is facing, separatist groups. The Khalistan movement is being revived overseas. The latest instance comes from the United States of America, and this time sanctioned groups are not driving the campaign. It's American lawmakers. And this happened last week. A picture of a citation is going viral. It is believed to be from the General Assembly of Connecticut. It recognizes 29th April as the anniversary of the Declaration of Sikh independence. And I have a copy. This is what the citation says. The Connecticut General Assembly offers its sincerest congratulations to the World Sikh Parliament in recognition of the 36th anniversary of the Declaration of Sikh Independence. We join with you, your friends and your family in commemorating the historic resolution passed on April 29, 1986. The citation was followed by an event. A group of Sikhs gathered in Norwich. It's a city in Connecticut. They raised a flag outside the city hall. And you don't need me to tell you that these are pro-Khalistan supporters, in fact, and they're being backed by the state of Connecticut. American lawmakers like to lecture India about human rights and the state of minorities. But how do they justify this? An American state backing separatists. And that's not all. It is openly endorsing breaking up the state of Punjab from India. Is this not foreign meddling? And who's behind this? The World Sikh Parliament. It's a Khalistani organization. Such groups are gaining ground in the US. In 2021, the Hudson Institute published a report, and it revealed some shocking details. There are at least 55 Kashmiri and Khalistani groups operating in the US, and it is possible, said the report, that they have links to Pakistan. They could be getting funding, support, even military training from the Pakistani establishment. And these possible links are yet to be confirmed. This is the Hudson Institute report. But the threat is obvious. Pro-Khalistani groups are operating in the US, but American authorities have been reluctant to investigate them. These groups operate in the open. They've held events in the past too. In 2020, they held a demonstration in New York. In 2019, these groups tried to ride on the momentum generated by the Black Lives Matter movement. They appropriated imagery and slogans of that protest and launched their own campaign. And these groups work in tandem with each other. They have a common modus operandi. They organize joint events. They share resources like lawyers, donors, accountants. If the US government wants, it can easily take this network of separatists down. But America so far has shown no willingness to go after such anti-India groups. The result is this: the Khalistan separatists have been given a free run. And it's not like the US is unaware about this threat. Khalistani separatists have tried to use American soil to launch attacks in the past. In the 1990s, federal agents in the US caught Bhajan Singh Bhinder. He was a pro-Khalistani separatist. What was he doing in the US? Trying to procure shoulder-fired missiles and assault weapons. And he was doing this for the Free Khalistan movement. The separatists are now staging a comeback, and American authorities choose to ignore them. India has launched a diplomatic campaign now. The American consulate in New York, the Indian consulate in New York, in fact, has issued a statement. It has condemned what happened in Connecticut. And this is what it said. This is an attempt by some mischievous elements to use the name of the assembly for their nefarious purposes. These vested interests seek to divide communities and promote bigotry and hatred. India now plans to take up this matter with US lawmakers. We'll track it for you. And law reminds me, Italy and Germany are in the middle of a legal battle involving Nazi-era war crimes from the Second World War. Germany has dragged Italy to the International Court of Justice. Berlin is afraid that Italy could be selling German property. Why would they do that? To compensate victims of Nazi war crimes. Turns out Italy is not done claiming reparations for Hitler's crimes. It is asking Germany to cough up more money. Here's a report.
Germany has dragged Italy to the court. Not just any court, but the United Nations' highest court. The ICJ, or the International Court of Justice. The obvious question is why? And the answer starts with this man. Adolf Hitler, Germany's former dictator. Under him, Nazi Germany committed war crimes. Many war crimes. Genocide, mass rape, massacres, forced labor. You know all about them. When the Second World War ended, defeated Germany was forced to compensate these crimes. It paid billions of euros to impacted countries. But there are some victims who are still demanding justice. In the early 2000s, relatives of 9 people moved Italy's highest court. They demanded that Germany compensated for killing their loved ones in Tuscany in the year 1944. The court ruled in the victims' favor. In 2008, Germany was ordered to pay 1 million euros in compensation. This was not a one-off case. Over the years, many Italians have moved court against Germany, all seeking compensation or reparation for war crimes. In 2012, ICJ ruled that such cases will be inadmissible. You know, history is history. And to be fair, Germany has compensated for its dark history. But despite this ruling, at least 25 cases were filed in Italy, demanding German compensation. Interestingly enough, in some cases, the courts ruled in favor of the complainants, meaning the court asked Germany to cough up money for Hitler's war crimes. Now, Berlin is afraid that Rome could seize properties owned by the German government, force the sale of the buildings in order to make the payments. One such decision will be taken by an Italian court by the 25th of May. So, Germany has rushed to the ICJ at Hague. What Berlin is looking for is a stay order on sale of any German property on Italian soil. It's a telling tale about Europe's unity at a time when the continent is supposed to be standing together against an invader.
For any world leader, your first overseas visit is extremely important. It sets the tone for your tenure. For Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, it was a mixed bag. His maiden visit was to Saudi Arabia. First, he was mocked for taking an oversized delegation. Then he claimed to be traveling at his own expense. And finally, he was heckled in Medina. We told you all about it. It seemed like everything was going wrong for him. But in the end, Shehbaz Sharif did manage a win. That is, if you call more debt a victory. That's what Islamabad got. More financial assistance from Saudi Arabia. Two parts to this assistance. One is an $8 billion package. This includes more oil financing, more deposits through Islamic bonds, and a rollover of existing $4.2 billion facilities. Basically, it's a bailout, or I should say, another bailout for Pakistan. Part 2 of the assistance is restructuring. Saudi Arabia has deposited $3 billion in Pakistan's central bank. The idea is to keep the Pakistan economy afloat. The problem is, Islamabad has no means to repay that deposit. So what do? Plead for extensions. This time, Saudi Arabia has obliged them. Here's what the joint statement says. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia affirmed its continuous support to Pakistan and its economy, including the discussion of augmenting the $3 billion deposit with the central bank through term extension or otherwise. Some much-needed relief there. But for how long? To repay loans, Pakistan needs to generate money. You cannot survive on bailouts alone. You need foreign investments. You need resilient industries. And that is where Pakistan is struggling. Shehbaz Sharif, the new Prime Minister, feels his visit was a grand success. Here's what he tweeted. My 3-day visit to Saudi Arabia ushers in a new era of close cooperation and engagement on bilateral, regional and global issues between our two brotherly countries. You can see why Shehbaz Sharif thinks so. A big economic package, a promise to review loans. Naturally, he thinks it was a success. But remember this. Imran Khan, his predecessor, also had a great start with Saudi Arabia. He drove the Crown Prince around, remember? He used his private jet. But pretty soon, Imran Khan was kicked out of the good books. And now he's got the cops behind him. Pakistan's anti-corruption agency is probing Imran Khan's wife's friend. Her name is Farah Khan. Apparently, her wealth increased rapidly after 2018. That's after Imran Khan became the Prime Minister of Pakistan. The government says her wealth exceeds her income. How much money are we talking about? More than 847 million Pakistani rupees, or $4 million US. Imran Khan is calling it a witch hunt. He says the charges are all fabricated.
हमारे दौर में तो जी नैब आजाद है, हम कुछ कर ही नहीं सकते थे. हम कोई बात करते थे जो नैब आजाद है. अब मैं नैब से पूछना चाहता हूं कि ये जो आपने फराह खान के ऊपर केस डाला है, ये किसी को भी पहले दिखाएं कि कोई केस बन सकता है। पहले तो क्या जी उसकी जो वेल्थ बियॉन्ड नोन सोर्स ऑफ इनकम है, ये सिर्फ पब्लिक ऑफिस होल्डर्स के ऊपर अप्लाई करती है। वो कौन सी कोई एमएनए या पब्लिक ऑफिस होल्डर थी? वो तो एक रियल एस्टेट पे काम करती है 20 साल से।
How the tables turn. Imran Khan was elected on an anti-corruption agenda. He weaponized the anti-graft agencies. He used it to target his political opponents, and now his own allies are under investigation. We don't know if this Farah Khan is guilty or not, but here's what we do know. Imran Khan lost the no-confidence motion on the 10th of April. Within days, Farah Khan fled to Dubai. Doesn't exactly scream innocence. But we let the investigators do their job. And by the way, it's not just the associates. Imran Khan himself could be arrested. We told you how Shehbaz Sharif was heckled in Medina. Well, Pakistan booked 150 people for that incident. They say it was planned to insult the Prime Minister. Among those 150 people is Imran Khan. Interior Minister, the new Interior Minister of Pakistan, Rana Sanaullah, is on a mission to pin him down. He says Imran Khan will be arrested for sure. Now, you may disagree with Pakistan's politics, but you cannot deny one thing: their consistency. It doesn't matter who is Prime Minister. The policies never change. Your best ally is the army. Your rivals are under investigation, if not in jail. And your foreign policy is based on getting bailouts from Riyadh. So don't mock the bickering and vendettas. Instead, focus on the consistency. That's what we say. Let's also take a look at what else is making news across the world. This is Gravitas Global Headlines.
After weeks under siege, at least 100 people were evacuated from the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol after the United Nations brokered a deal to extract civilians. Denmark and Sweden summoned Russia's ambassadors after a Russian plane violated the airspace of both countries last week. The European Union has accused Apple of blocking rivals from its popular tap-as-you-go iPhone payment system, opening a fresh battlefront between the two sides. A strike by owners of fuel tankers over the weekend renewed Sri Lanka's long queues for diesel and petrol as pumps ran dry, compounding the island nation's economic and energy crises. Police unions gathered in Paris to protest as a policeman was indicted after 2 people were shot dead after officers fired at a vehicle. 8 people, including 6 children, have died in a fire that ripped through a community in the Philippines' capital of Manila. Another 3 people were injured in the blaze. New statistics have revealed sea levels could rise twice as fast in New Zealand. The country's sea levels could rise 30 centimeters in the next 10 to 20 years. Iraq's capital, Baghdad, was once again covered in a sheet of orange dust as storms become increasingly common in the West Asian nation. Jon Rahm clinched the Mexico Open title for his first PGA Tour victory since winning the US Open last summer. The world number 2 completed a wire-to-wire win and held off late charges from Tony Finau and Brandon Wu. The Milwaukee Bucks and the Golden State Warriors began the second round of the NBA playoffs with wins. Defending champions Bucks beat Boston Celtics 101-89, while the Warriors edged the Memphis Grizzlies 117-116.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching.